Once again, I'm Juan Hernandez, the expert control specialist here at GW. Um, I'll just be going through a little bit of expert controls, what they are, and specifically how they apply to foreign influence. Um, so here we go. So we already touched upon a little bit of the previous one. So this slide basically, I want to illustrate where expert controls fall within the foreign influence umbrella. So it is one aspect of it, right? So we have what Hiromi mentioned, peer review violations or failure to disclose substantial foreign resources. So these are some of the concerns the federal government has. So continuing, failure to disclose significant conflict of interest. And then we have export controls. And the main theme connecting all of this is basically just the federal government's fear of having certain undue influence on our research, on the research enterprise, and mainly having, well, considering the geopolitical aspects of it, having a disadvantage with having the technology and perhaps falling into the wrong hands in certain technology or certain research that would put the United States at a disadvantage economically and for defense purposes as well. So with that being said, I'd like to move to the next slide here, defining what export controls are. So export controls are basically the laws and regulations that govern the transfer of controlled items or information to foreign nationals, countries, and entities for reasons of national interest. So again, kind of what I mentioned before. And of course, it might seem very complicated and I mean, like we were discussing before in the previous presentation, it's extremely complicated topic. Export controls, again, are extremely complicated as well. And so that's why I have this little illustration, basically having the federal government represented by Uncle Sam talking to a researcher or a member of the industry, and it's basically extremely complicated. So this is where I like to emphasize, this is why, again, our office is here to answer any questions or concerns. And it really depends on a case-by-case basis a lot of times. So that's why we're here to do the analysis for our researchers, for the GW community, and make sure we're not running afoul of any export control violations or any undue foreign influence conflicts as well. So specifically for export controls, why do they matter? Certain export control laws may apply to GW research and other scholarly activity. Federal government has increased the enforcement and investigation of universities, and this has kind of been congruent with the rise of the importance of foreign influence. Export controls, again, huge part of it, and the federal government has really started cracking down on it, and there's been a lot of enforcements, even with universities, and due to the complicated matter of it, sometimes it's not always obvious, and I think I'll try to explain it why later on in the presentation. And so failure to comply may result in serious criminal and civil penalties for both the university and the individual researcher. Extreme violations could potentially mean a heavy fine of up to the 6 figures and 7-figure dollars, and also potentially some jail time. And of course, relatedly, harm to GW's reputation and adverse publicity. So we being here in the center of Washington, D.C., we don't want to be in the Washington Post. We don't want to make the news for this type of violations or really any violations, but that's another concern too. But not everything is bad, right? So if we can show we're a reliable partner, we can provide a pathway to increase funding opportunities. So kind of like what we were saying earlier, maintaining a good relationship with our funding partners and showing we're reliable and we're following all the regulations. And again, that's why we're here to assist the GW community. So now I'd like to discuss 3 of the main regulatory bodies at the federal government regarding export controls. The first one I'd like to talk about is the Department of Commerce. And under the Department of Commerce, we have the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS. And they handle what's known as the Export Administration Regulations, EAR. Under the EAR, we have the Commerce Control List. And so this is, quite frankly, what we mostly deal with in a university setting, a university research enterprise setting. Articles and services with both commercial and military applications, right? So research, the dual use research is what we see a lot. And it's exactly what the name implies, as I just read the definition. But this can get a little bit complicated because sometimes it straddles both lines. It could be both commercial and it could be both military. And there's a lot of, it depends on a lot of conditions, and it's not clear cut at all. And so that's where we like to assist our researchers in helping determine if it falls within one or two matters. It could fall both. And so the Department of State is the next regulatory body I would like to talk about. The Director of Defense Trade Controls is the bureau that handles it. And under them, they handle the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, betterly known as ITAR. And ITAR handles the United States munitions list. And this is more articles and defense services related technology that are military in nature. And so we are seeing a little more of a progress as we become, as GW aspires to go to the level of research we're doing. We are starting to see creeping into ITAR technology. And so again, it's very important, maybe not in like the medical science research, but other engineering and so forth. So we're starting to see it a little more creeping into it. So again, we're happy to provide the analysis, and if we see anything, we're more than happy to set forth any conditions or technology control plan that might be necessary, which I'll be touching upon later on as well. And so the last major regulatory body I want to touch upon here is the Department of Treasury, and they handle the Office of Foreign Assets Control. Again, going back to government acronyms, OFAC. And so specially designated nationals list and the consolidated sanctions list fall upon OFAC. And as the name implies, again, is administers and enforces sanctions against foreign governments and other entities. And so this is kind of what Hiromi was touching about earlier on doing our due diligence whenever we have foreign partners, any foreign collaborations, maybe foreign collaborations with publications, right? So we provide that service. We like to screen against certain databases. Visual compliance is one of them, but also certain ones that the government holds. And again, it's just a due diligence, making sure we're not partnering with any individuals who might be in the sanctions list or countries that might be heavily sanctioned by the United States. And again, it's just a due diligence, because I want to emphasize we understand there's going to be foreign collaborations, and it's not our interest or even intention to stop these foreign collaborations, right? Because that's what an open environment of research entails. And so again, it's just a due diligence, making sure we're staying within all the regulations and following them. And again, in our office that service, if it needs to be any screening or anything, we can make sure to do that. So I'd like to pivot a little bit to the regulations, or how export control regulations define an export. So mostly when most people think of an export, we think of a physical export, right? So shipping research materials internationally, or personally taking research materials abroad. That's really what most people come to think of when think of an export. However, it could also be orally. So teaching a foreign unauthorized person in the laboratory to develop, build, to construct controlled software. That could be considered an export, just as well as presenting research at an international conference and symposium. So this is, again, where we have to be careful in making sure if the country is sanctioned or not, and again, who we're collaborating with, and we're happy to do the screening. So visually as well, an expert could also be considered, a technology can also be considered an expert. It's visually exported, by showing controlled written documents or blue foreign prints to foreign nationals, whether in the US or abroad, and electronically. Emailing or faxing controlled information, or storing information in the cloud or elsewhere on the internet. So this is where I like to emphasize GW policy actually states if there's anything labeled as export controlled is considered export controlled, then storing information in the cloud or elsewhere on the internet is prohibited under GW policy. However, we're happy to work with the individual if it is export controlled technology to provide a plan with our IT department and so forth. And so we can develop a plan to make sure we're staying afoot of all regulations. And so now just briefly here, I mentioned the commerce control list earlier. And as you can see, it is a very, very broad categories. And under those categories, we can go from nuclear and miscellaneous, material, chemicals, and microorganisms and toxins, all the way to category 9, which is airspace and propulsion. So, but in between that, you can see it's also electronics, computers, telecommunications, and it's just very broad, and that's what makes it really complicated. And again, it's a case by case study. And so if there's any questions about this common controllers, we're the office to come by, because it's extremely complicated. And I mean, it takes a certain amount of analysis to do it. And as you can see, the 5 product groups as well. So it falls different categories: systems, equipment, components. And if a technology does fall under the Commerce Control list, it usually has a classification, as you can see to the far right of your screen: the CCL category group, the product group number, and then we have just different categorization. So it gets pretty complicated as well. So we usually try to assist our researchers with that. And the control items as well. The United States munitions list, again, falls under ITAR, but it's a very broad group. And again, we're here to assist with this, as you're more than welcome to look at it, but it's extremely complicated as well. At this point, if you have any questions, please feel free to give Joyce, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation as well. And so now it can seem a little overwhelming and maybe a little bit scary, but we usually try to say, luckily, we fall as a university, as an institution of research, we try to fall within the fundamental research exclusion. And so, but that's better known as the FRA. So what does the FRA consist of? It's basically has to meet all these 5 conditions. It has to be basic and applied research in science and engineering. Has to be within an accredited institution within the United States. So we, luckily at GW, that's not an issue. But it also has to the results also have to be published or shared broadly within the scientific community. So again, the openness of the research, and making sure all the results are within the general scientific community. It also concerns information and not items. So this is important. So it can't be the actual product of a research or any physical products, right? Going back to what is considered an export. It concerns the information on not items. And then again, the openness theme again allows foreign nationals to participate in research activities. So there cannot be any conditions that exclude any foreign nationals from any countries or from any individuals from being able to participate in the research. And usually we try to stay within these conditions. We encourage everybody to stay within these conditions, but if not, again, talk to our offices and we can assist in either maintaining the FRE or making a plan later on so we can stay within the regulations. So now comes the relevant updates kind of to the ones that are relevant to export control. So again, this will state the increasing concerns that the federal government has and the actions they've taken over the past really year to 2 years of, publishing this and making it kind of official and kind of gaining an insight of where we're heading to. So the first rule I like to really the main rule I like to point out is the BIS military and use and user, which was published last year on April 28th, 2020. So this rule basically significantly expands and strengthens the existing military end user restrictions, expands definition of military end user. So basically the gist of this, it's the United States government with countries of risk have been identifying certain institutions, corporations that have connections to adversary governments. And this is where it gets really tricky for us, because if there's a collaboration with, say, a university and an adversary country, and they have any connections to the government, we would want to know that to make sure we're not really collaborating with them. And this is where it gets tricky, because it can fall under a university and an institution of higher learning, and it's not obvious sometimes that they have connections to an adversary government. And so this is again where it plays an important part of screening and doing our due diligence to make sure we're not, collaborating with any institution that we're not supposed to. And it's the same with any corporations as well. And it's an extremely complicated list, and that's why we're here to assist our researchers and the GW community with that. And similarly, the BIS in December 23rd of last year, they finalized some of the military end user list, but I've been looking at it and they've done another update. I think they did it just last month. So it's an ongoing process. And even with the change of administrations, it's something that's probably going to continue for the foreseeable future. So what are we doing here at GW with expert control compliance? How do we maintain it? So it's basically just the way we do it, it's a multi-pronged process. It's, first of all, education and ongoing training, sort of like what we're doing right here. I also try to reach out to our researchers if they request a training, if there's any questions, happy to do that. We compile a database of GW research portfolio and assets. So again, maintaining the line of communications with researchers, making sure we know what's going on campus. Already mentioned screening process for new hires, visitors, and entities and companies that conduct business with GW. We also are trying to get the word out. We also do foreign travel and shipment. So if there's any due diligence that needs to be done, we can do that as well. Safeguard information that impacts national security and economic competitiveness, including personal and sensitive information. Already touched upon that. If there's any doubts, we're happy to come up with a technology control plan or any other plan that makes sure that we're safeguarding information. And also encouraging the reporting of suspicious behavior, right? So kind of like what Hiromi alluded to earlier. If there's if it's an unpaid visitor and there's a couple of red flags, we might want to take a closer look. But again, it's more of a holistic view rather than a specific red flag that impacts it. So that's what we'll be doing here in analysis. And again, also intake system is in progress. That actually will fall into another slide. We have a recently published website that now has the intake system, and we would like to use it so our researchers and the GW community can reach us directly. So now just briefly, expert control analysis. This is basically what we do in our office, or what I do and Hiromi does. And I just like to have it for our researchers. So whenever they're deciding to come to us, kind of consider this. So expert controls. So what is being shipped or transferred? Is it on any United States munitions list? Is it on the commerce list? So where is it going to? Is the commodity technology source code being sent to sanctioned countries, or does any of the entities have restrictions? Who is the commodity technology source code being sent to? Again, similar to where is it on any restricted party? Is it a restricted party? Is any on a list? And why? Why is the commodity technology source being sent to? Is it on any of the military end use? And so again, it shows how complicated it can be, right? And so we tried to do this analysis for our researchers. And here's the intake form. I like to make a shameless plug into it. It is now online on our Office of Research Integrity website under the expert controls page. And again, this is just a way for our researchers to be able to directly reach out to us. And if they have any questions, any concerns, any screenings need to be done, it's a good way so we're able to do it. And I usually try to get the answers, get at least back to the research that we're on it within the day or so. But that is something we're really excited to have now for our community, GW community. But that is basically the gist of the expert control presentation. There's our contact information here at the Office of Vice President Research. We're looking 1922 F Street, but then we also have my contact information and Hiromi's contact information. And I encourage everybody to visit our website for further information. And again, we're happy to answer any questions, any concerns, or provide any reviews at any time. Thank you. And I think now if there's any questions or anything, if there's not any questions, I think we can move on now to Monique Fox. The floor is yours.